The morning sun filtered through the tall buildings of downtown Portland, casting long shadows across the sidewalk where Eleanor sat with her worn canvas bag beside her. At 96 years old, Eleanor Jenkins had a face that told stories. Deep wrinkles around her eyes from decades of smiling, frown lines etched between her brows from years of worry, and a determined set to her jaw that hadn't softened with age. 3 years ago, Eleanor had a home. She had 4 walls, a roof, and 60 years of memories stored in photo albums and trinkets collected throughout her long life. But then Thomas, her husband of 73 years, fell ill. The medical bills piled up faster than their modest savings could handle. After Thomas passed, the bank took the house and Eleanor found herself with nowhere to go. "Morning, Mrs. Jenkins," called Hector, the street vendor who sold coffee and pastries from his cart on the corner. "The usual today?" Eleanor smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Just half a cup if you don't mind, dear. Need to stretch my dollars this week." Hector handed her a steaming cup and a paper bag. Threw in a cinnamon roll, too. "My grandmother's recipe. Can't have you going hungry?" "You're too kind," Eleanor said, accepting the small kindness with dignity rather than pity. She had never imagined she'd be counting pennies at nearly 100 years old. But life had a way of surprising you. She sipped her coffee slowly, savoring its warmth. Fall in Portland brought chilly mornings, and her old bones felt every degree of temperature drop. Eleanor wore layers, a floral dress beneath a cardigan, topped with a coat she'd found at the shelter's donation bin. Around her neck hung her most precious possession, a small golden key on a simple chain. "That's a pretty necklace," a young girl said as she passed by with her mother. "Is it magic?" Eleanor smiled. "In a way. It's the key to my piano. Not the piano itself anymore, but the music inside me." The little girl's mother tugged her along, casting a sympathetic glance toward Eleanor. People often looked at her that way, either with pity or as if she were invisible. Few stopped to talk. Fewer still knew that the old homeless woman had once filled concert halls with music that moved audiences to tears. When the rain clouds started gathering overhead, Eleanor gathered her few belongings and made her way toward the Grand Avenue Hotel. The doorman, Anthony, had gotten to know her over the past year and often looked the other way when she came inside to warm up. "Storm coming." "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, holding the door. "Better wait it out in here." "Thank you, Anthony. I won't be a bother." "Never are," he replied with a kind smile. The Grand Avenue Hotel lobby was a magnificent space with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and plush velvet seating arrangements. In the corner stood its crowning jewel, a gleaming black Steinway grand piano. On most days, the hotel hired a pianist to play during afternoon tea, but often the beautiful instrument sat silent and untouched. Eleanor made her way to her usual corner chair, positioned just far enough from the main walkways to avoid attention, but with a perfect view of the piano. She placed her bag carefully at her feet and settled in, her eyes drawn to the instrument as if by magnetic force. Her fingers, knotted with arthritis now, the knuckles swollen and stiff, began to move in her lap, playing silent melodies on imaginary keys. Eleanor could hear the music in her head as clearly as if it were filling the room. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece she had played at her first recital as a girl of 12. Bach's Minuet in G, which she had taught to countless students during her years as a piano teacher. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, Thomas's favorite, which she had played for him every anniversary. A hotel employee, Clara, noticed Eleanor and brought over a complimentary cup of tea. "Thought you might like something warm, Mrs. Jenkins." "How thoughtful," Eleanor said. "I was just sitting here remembering." "Remembering what?" Clara asked, taking a moment to sit beside the elderly woman. "When these hands could really play," Eleanor said, looking down at her gnarled fingers. "I had my first piano when I was 6 years old. My father worked extra shifts at the factory to buy it. It wasn't fancy, just an old upright with a few sticky keys. But to me it was magical." Clara glanced at the golden key hanging around Eleanor's neck. "Is that from your piano?" Eleanor nodded, touching it gently. "The only thing I kept when they took the house. Couldn't bear to part with it." She paused, lost in memory. "My daughter Lisa wanted me to come live with her in Florida, but after Thomas died, I just couldn't leave Portland. All our memories are here. She sends money when she can, but she has her own family to worry about." "Do you ever play anymore?" Clara asked, nodding toward the grand piano. Eleanor shook her head. No, dear. These old hands don't work like they used to. And besides, she added with a small laugh, I don't think your manager would appreciate a homeless woman at the Keys. As if summoned by mention, the hotel manager, Robert Chen, strode through the lobby, speaking urgently into his phone. What do you mean David can't make it? The Henderson wedding party is expecting music for their tea. Their reservation has been in place for months. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Well, find someone, anyone. We need a pianist here in 30 minutes. Eleanor watched as Robert pocketed his phone and approached the front desk, clearly frustrated. Soon, a small crowd began to gather in the lobby, well-dressed people chatting excitedly about a wedding that would take place the following day. They cast curious glances toward the empty piano. I've called every musician in our contact list, the concierge told Robert. Everyone's booked for the weekend. The wedding planner is going to have a fit. Eleanor sat quietly, watching the drama unfold. Outside, the rain began to fall in sheets, drumming against the large windows. The Henderson party continued to arrive, filling the lobby with laughter and chatter, oblivious to the management's panic. Can't we just play recordings? Someone suggested. The bride specifically requested live piano music, Robert replied. Her grandmother is a former pianist and they wanted something special for her. Eleanor's heart beat a little faster. Her fingers twitched in her lap, playing phantom notes on invisible keys. It had been so long, years in fact, since she had touched a real piano. Would she even remember? Would her arthritic hands cooperate? The golden key felt warm against her chest, almost as if it were urging her forward. Slowly, Eleanor rose from her chair. Her knees protested and she reached for her walking stick to steady herself. Step by careful step, she made her way across the lobby past groups of wedding guests, toward the magnificent Steinway. Clara noticed her first. Mrs. Jenkins? Eleanor didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the piano, seeing not the instrument before her but the one from her childhood, the one from her teaching studio, the one that had stood in her living room for 60 years. As she reached the bench, Robert stepped forward with a concerned expression. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but that's not for public use. Eleanor looked up at him, her blue eyes clear and determined. Young man, I played Carnegie Hall in 1952. I taught piano for 60 years. If you need a pianist, I'm available. Robert hesitated, looking from the elderly homeless woman to the expectant wedding party. Eleanor didn't wait for his decision. She carefully placed her bag and walking stick aside and lowered herself onto the bench. The polished keys gleamed before her like old friends waiting for her touch. Eleanor took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and placed her fingers on the keyboard. For a moment, nothing happened. The lobby grew quieter as people turned to look. Then, like water breaking through a dam, the music came. Her gnarled fingers found their way across the keys as if guided by memory alone, and the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the space. The transformation was immediate and complete. No longer was she Eleanor Jenkins, the homeless old woman who sat in hotel lobbies to escape the rain. She was Eleanor Jenkins, concert pianist, teacher, master of the keyboard. Her back straightened, her face softened, and despite the pain in her joints, her hands moved with grace and purpose. The lobby fell silent except for the music. Hotel staff paused in their work. Guests stopped their conversations. Everyone turned to watch the elderly woman who played as if the piano were a part of her very soul. And for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor Jenkins felt like herself again. The music flowed from Eleanor's fingers like water, filling every corner of the Grand Avenue Hotel's lobby. Her eyes remained closed, lost in the melody of Debussy's Clair de Lune as her weathered hands glided over the keys with surprising grace. For a woman who hadn't touched a piano in 3 years, the music poured out of her as if no time had passed at all. Robert Chen, the hotel manager, stood frozen in place. His expression had transformed from skepticism to wonder. The wedding guests, who had been chatting loudly just moments before, now stood in stunned silence. A few had taken seats while others leaned against walls or columns, captivated by the unexpected performance. As the final notes of Clair de Lune faded, there was a moment of perfect stillness. Then came the applause, hesitant at first, then building to enthusiastic clapping that echoed throughout the marble lobby. Eleanor opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented as she returned to reality. She hadn't meant to lose herself so completely in the music. A shy smile crossed her face as she turned to see the crowd that had gathered around the piano. "That was absolutely beautiful," said an elderly woman who stepped forward from the wedding party. She walked with a cane, her silver hair elegantly styled. "I'm Rose Henderson, the grandmother of the bride," she explained. "I was a piano teacher for 40 years, and I haven't heard someone play with such feeling in a very long time." "Eleanor Jenkins," Eleanor replied, extending her hand. "Former concert pianist and teacher myself." Rose's eyes widened with recognition. "Eleanor Jenkins? The Eleanor Jenkins who performed with the Portland Symphony in the 60s and 70s. Eleanor nodded, surprised to be remembered. "My dear, I attended several of your performances. Your Bach interpretations were unmatched." Rose turned to her family. "This woman was legendary in Portland's classical music scene." Robert stepped forward, his professional demeanor softened by amazement. "Mrs. Jenkins, would you consider playing for the Henderson party this afternoon? We would compensate you." "Of course." Eleanor's hands ached from just the one piece. Years without playing and arthritis had taken their toll. But the joy she'd felt while performing was worth the pain. "I would be honored," she said. Clara, the kind hotel employee who had brought Eleanor tea earlier, hurried over with a glass of water. "That was incredible, Mrs. Jenkins. I had no idea you could play like that." "There's a lot people don't know about me," Eleanor replied with a wink. "Most folks just see an old homeless woman." Within minutes, Robert had transformed the scene. Hotel staff quickly arranged the lobby seating area into a more formal configuration around the piano. Someone brought Eleanor a cushion for the bench to make her more comfortable. A young bellhop was dispatched to find sheet music in the hotel's storage room, returning with several dusty folios of classical pieces. "I won't need those," Eleanor told him gently. "I've carried this music in my head for decades." For the next hour, Eleanor played. She moved from Debussy to Chopin to Bach, occasionally taking requests from Rose or other guests. Her fingers sometimes faltered on the more technical passages, but the emotion in her playing more than made up for any missed notes. She played pieces she had performed on concert stages and simpler songs she had taught to beginning students. Each melody unlocked memories of concert halls and living rooms, of students young and old, of Thomas sitting beside her on quiet evenings as she played just for him. The Henderson family was captivated. The bride-to-be, a young woman named Lily, sat beside her grandmother, both of them occasionally wiping away tears during the more moving pieces. As Eleanor began Beethoven's Für Elise, she noticed Anthony, the doorman, standing at the back of the crowd. He caught her eye and gave her a thumbs up, his face beaming with pride as if he'd discovered her himself. Hotel guests who weren't part of the wedding party had begun to drift into the lobby, attracted by the beautiful music. Some took pictures with their phones. A few recorded short videos. Eleanor was too absorbed in her playing to notice. When she finally finished with a gentle rendition of Brahms' Lullaby, her hands were trembling with exhaustion. The audience stood and applauded. Rose Henderson came forward again, this time with her granddaughter. "Mrs. Jenkins, you've made this rehearsal day even more special than we could have imagined," Rose said. "Lily here has something to ask you." The bride-to-be, elegant in a blue dress, smiled warmly. "My wedding is tomorrow afternoon. Our pianist canceled at the last minute. And after hearing you play, I can't imagine anyone else providing the music for my special day. Would you consider playing at my wedding? We would pay you, of course." Eleanor was speechless. From homeless street dweller to wedding pianist in a single afternoon, life could certainly take unexpected turns. "I would be honored," she said finally. "But I'm afraid I don't have appropriate attire for such an occasion." "Leave that to us," Lily said, squeezing her grandmother's hand. "We'll take care of everything." Robert approached with an envelope. "Your payment for today's performance, Mrs. Jenkins, and I'd like to discuss a more permanent arrangement as well, if you're interested." Inside the envelope was more money than Eleanor had seen in months. She tried to keep her hand steady as she tucked it carefully into her cardigan pocket. "A permanent arrangement?" she asked. "The Grand Avenue has been without a regular lobby pianist for some time now. Our guests clearly appreciate your talent." He gestured to the crowd, many of whom were still lingering, hoping for more music. "It wouldn't be full-time, just a few afternoons a week, but it would come with a modest salary." Eleanor's heart raced. A job, regular income, at 96 years old when most people had long since given up on her. "I need to think about it," she said, though inside she already knew her answer. As the crowd dispersed and hotel staff began returning the lobby to its normal arrangement, Clara brought Eleanor another cup of tea. "You've caused quite a stir," she said, nodding toward the front desk where Robert was speaking excitedly on the phone. "I haven't seen him this animated in months." Eleanor sipped her tea, her mind whirling with possibilities. "It's strange how life works, isn't it? This morning I was just trying to get out of the rain. Now I'm being offered a job and asked to play at a wedding. Where will you stay tonight?" Clara asked. "It's supposed to storm again." Reality crashed back. Despite the eventful afternoon, Eleanor was still homeless. The money in her pocket would help, but it wasn't enough for even the cheapest apartment. "I have my usual spots," Eleanor said vaguely. In truth, she had been sleeping in a church doorway that offered some protection from the elements, but she kept her dignity by never revealing the full extent of her hardship. Clara glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "There's a small storage room off the service corridor. It has a cot where staff sometimes nap during long shifts. I could leave it unlocked tonight." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears at the kindness. "I couldn't impose—" "You wouldn't be imposing. After what you did today, you saved the Henderson event and gave everyone here a beautiful gift." Clara patted her hand. "Just for tonight until something more permanent can be arranged." As the afternoon faded into evening, Eleanor found herself in unfamiliar territory. Hopeful. She hadn't felt hopeful in years. Not since Thomas fell ill. Certainly not since losing their home. Her fingers still ached from playing, but it was a good ache, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. Rose Henderson returned to the lobby with a garment bag before leaving with her family. "For tomorrow," she said, handing it to Eleanor. "It was mine, but I've had no occasion to wear it in years. I think it will fit you perfectly." Inside was a simple but elegant navy blue dress with a matching jacket. Eleanor touched the fabric reverently. "I can't accept this." "Nonsense," Rose interrupted. From one pianist to another. "Consider it professional courtesy." She leaned in closer. "And between you and me, I'm glad Lily's original pianist canceled. Some things are just meant to be." After everyone had gone, Eleanor sat alone at the piano, not playing, just resting her hands on the silent keys. Anthony approached as his shift ended. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, "I've walked past you nearly every day for a year, and I never knew you had such a gift. Makes me wonder what other people I'm missing." "We all have stories," Eleanor replied softly. "Most people just don't take the time to listen." As night fell over Portland for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor Jenkins didn't worry about finding shelter from the rain. Instead, she dreamed of music, of weddings, and just maybe, of a new beginning at 96 years old. The morning of Lily Henderson's wedding arrived with sunshine streaming through the small window of the hotel storage room. Eleanor woke slowly, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. The cot was narrow but comfortable, certainly better than the church doorway where she'd spent so many nights. A small travel alarm clock that Clara had lent her showed it was just past 7. There was a gentle knock at the door. "Mrs. Jenkins?" "It's Clara. I've brought you some breakfast." Eleanor smoothed her hair and opened the door to find the young hotel employee balancing a tray with toast, fruit, and a pot of tea. "You didn't have to do this," Eleanor said, but her stomach growled loudly, betraying her hunger. Clara smiled. "Consider it part of the hotel's new pianist package." She set the tray down on a small table. "Mr. Chen has set aside the employee locker room for you to prepare for the wedding this afternoon. There's a shower and everything you'll need." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. Such simple kindnesses, yet they meant the world to someone who had gone without for so long. By noon, Eleanor had transformed. Rose Henderson's navy dress fit almost perfectly. Clara had helped pin Eleanor's silver hair into an elegant bun, and someone from the hotel spa had even stopped by to offer a light touch of makeup. Looking in the mirror, Eleanor barely recognized herself. The homeless woman who sat in hotel lobbies for warmth was gone, replaced by a dignified pianist ready for a performance. The wedding was held in the Grand Avenue's main ballroom, decorated with white roses and silver ribbons. The Steinway had been moved from the lobby, positioned near large windows that overlooked the hotel's garden. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she settled onto the bench, but not from fear. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose. As guests filed in, filling the rows of white chairs, Eleanor played soft classical pieces. Her fingers found the keys more easily today, muscle memory returning with each hour spent at the piano. She saw Anthony the doorman, dressed in his uniform, escorting elderly guests to their seats. He gave her a discreet thumbs up as he passed. When the ceremony began, Eleanor played the traditional wedding march as Lily walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Throughout the ceremony, she provided gentle background music, watching through misty eyes as the young couple exchanged vows. She thought of her own wedding to Thomas 75 years ago, simpler than this elaborate affair, but filled with the same hope and love. At the reception afterward, Eleanor played upbeat classics and even a few jazz standards she remembered from her younger days. Guests approached the piano between dances to compliment her playing, each one surprised when Rose introduced her as Eleanor Jenkins, the renowned pianist. "I heard you were homeless," one guest said bluntly after too many glasses of champagne. "Is that true?" Before Eleanor could respond, Rose stepped in smoothly. "Eleanor has had some housing challenges recently, but her talent has never diminished. In fact, the Grand Avenue has just hired her as their resident pianist." Eleanor shot Rose a grateful look. The older woman had protected her dignity while acknowledging the truth. As the reception continued into the evening, Eleanor began to tire. Her arthritic hands ached and she struggled through a particularly complicated Mozart piece. Robert noticed immediately and approached the piano. "Mrs. Jenkins, we've arranged for a room for you tonight." "You must be exhausted." "A room?" Eleanor asked, confused. The Henderson family insisted on covering it as a thank you for your beautiful playing. And, he hesitated, "I've spoken with the hotel management. We would like to offer you a small suite in the staff quarters, as part of your compensation package if you accept our offer to play regularly." Eleanor's hands stilled on the keys. "A place to live?" Robert nodded. "It's not large, but it has a private bathroom and is near the service elevator. You would have access to staff meals, and we could work out a schedule that doesn't tax your health too much." For the second time that day, Eleanor found herself fighting back tears. "I would be very grateful," she managed to say. By the time the wedding ended, word had already begun to spread about the elderly pianist. A local news reporter who had attended as a guest mentioned Eleanor in his society column the next morning. The highlight of the Henderson-Chen wedding wasn't the 5-tier cake or the bride's designer gown, but the 96-year-old pianist whose playing moved guests to tears. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor settled into a new routine. She played in the hotel lobby every afternoon from 2 until 5, taking frequent breaks to rest her hands. Hotel guests began planning their afternoons around her performances, the lobby growing crowded with listeners. The hotel's afternoon tea service, once sparsely attended, now required reservations. Eleanor's small suite became home. Clara helped her decorate with framed sheet music and a few potted plants. Eleanor placed her most precious possession, a faded photograph of Thomas, on the bedside table. On a particularly busy Thursday, a middle-aged woman lingered after Eleanor's performance. She introduced herself as Patricia Wilson from the Portland Daily News. "I'd like to do a feature story about you," she explained. "Your journey from homelessness to becoming the Grand Avenue star attraction is remarkable." Eleanor hesitated. "I'm not sure I want my troubles made public." "It's not about exploiting your difficulties," Patricia assured her. "It's about your talent persevering through hardship. Your story could inspire others who are struggling." The article appeared the following Sunday, complete with a photograph of Eleanor at the piano, her eyes closed in concentration as her hands moved across the keys. The headline read, "From Carnegie Hall to Homelessness and Back Again, The Extraordinary Journey of Eleanor Jenkins." Patricia had done her research, tracking down programs from Eleanor's concerts in the 1950s and interviewing former students who remembered her teaching. The article detailed her early promise as a concert pianist, her decision to focus on teaching after marrying Thomas, and the financial disaster that led to homelessness in her 90s. What makes Jenkins remarkable is not just her survival, but how her artistry remained intact through unimaginable hardship, Patricia wrote. When she plays Chopin, listeners are transported by the depth of emotion she brings to each note, perhaps because every piece is informed by a life fully lived, with all its joys and sorrows. The day after the article appeared, Eleanor arrived at the piano to find a crowd already waiting. There were familiar faces, regular hotel guests who had been coming for weeks, but many newcomers as well. As she began to play, she noticed people recording her performance on their phones. It made her slightly uncomfortable, but Robert assured her it was good publicity for the hotel. Among the crowd that day was Dr. William Thompson, head of the music department at Portland University. He waited until Eleanor had finished playing before approaching her. "Mrs. Jenkins, your technique is remarkable," he said, "especially considering." He gestured vaguely toward her hands, twisted with arthritis. Eleanor smiled. "They don't work as well as they used to, but they remember the music. I wonder if you would consider speaking to my piano students. Your experience and approach to interpretation would be invaluable to them." And so, in addition to her daily performances, Eleanor began visiting the university once a week. She couldn't demonstrate much on the keyboard anymore, but she could guide young pianists with her words, helping them find the emotion in pieces they approached with technical precision but little heart. "Music isn't just in the notes," she told them. "It's in the spaces between them, in the way one phrase whispers to another. You must make the piano sing." Students were skeptical at first. What could this elderly woman teach them that their professors couldn't? But when Eleanor spoke about Chopin's state of mind while composing the nocturnes, or described the particular way Rachmaninoff used melody to evoke longing, they began to listen. One young man, a technically brilliant but emotionally restrained pianist, stayed after class. "My grandfather was homeless for the last years of his life," he told Eleanor quietly. "I never understood how it happened to him until I read your story." "What was your grandfather's name?" Eleanor asked. "Joseph," he replied. "He was a veteran. None of us knew how to help him." Eleanor patted his hand. "Next time you play, think of Joseph. Let his story flow through your fingers." The following week, the young man performed Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, and for the first time, his playing made his professor cry. As autumn turned to winter, Eleanor's reputation continued to grow. Local classical music lovers made special trips to the hotel. A small chamber group invited her to collaborate on a Christmas concert. Someone created a social media page dedicated to the Piano Grandma, sharing videos of her performances that garnered thousands of views. Through it all, Eleanor remained humble. She accepted the hotel's hospitality and the audience's admiration with grace, but never forgot the church doorway where she'd once sought shelter, or the strangers who had walked past her without a glance when she was just another homeless elderly woman. "Fame is fleeting," she told Clara one evening as they shared tea in her suite. "What matters is the music and the kindness we show each other along the way." Winter settled over Portland with a bitter chill. Snow dusted the sidewalks outside the Grand Avenue Hotel, and inside the lobby was decorated with evergreen garlands and twinkling lights. Eleanor, wrapped in a new wool cardigan that Clara had given her for Christmas, made her way slowly to the piano each afternoon, her walking stick tapping against the marble floor. 3 months had passed since Eleanor had first played at the hotel, and her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Her small suite in the staff quarters had become a true home, decorated with framed photographs of her performances and cards from admirers. The hotel's chef made sure she received nourishing meals, and Robert had arranged for a doctor to check on her regularly. But as January's cold deepened, so did Eleanor's exhaustion. At 96, the daily performances were taking their toll. Her arthritis flared painfully in the cold weather, making her fingers stiff and uncooperative. Some days she had to soak her hands in warm water for an hour before she could play at all. "You should take some time off," Clara suggested one afternoon, noticing how Eleanor winced as she flexed her fingers. "The hotel guest would understand." Eleanor shook her head stubbornly. "The music keeps me alive," she said. "Without it, I'd just be an old woman waiting to die." That afternoon, her playing was noticeably different. She fumbled through Chopin's waltz in C-sharp minor, a piece she normally performed flawlessly. Halfway through Beethoven's Fürelise, her right hand seized with a cramp, forcing her to stop abruptly. "I'm sorry," she told the concerned audience. "Just need a moment to rest." A distinguished-looking man in the front row stood up. "Please don't apologize. We're honored to hear you play, Mrs. Jenkins." He introduced himself as Dr. Frank Reynolds, a rheumatologist. "I'd be happy to look at those hands if you'd allow me." In Eleanor's suite after her performance, Dr. Reynolds examined her gnarled fingers with gentle care. "The arthritis is quite advanced," he said. "I'm amazed you can play at all." Stubbornness, Eleanor replied with a small smile. And necessity until recently. Dr. Reynolds prescribed a new medication and suggested therapy exercises. Playing the piano is actually good therapy in moderation, he explained. But you're pushing yourself too hard. You need more rest between performances. When Eleanor explained the doctor's recommendations to Robert, he immediately adjusted her schedule. You'll play only 3 days a week, he insisted. For 1 hour each day with breaks as needed. Eleanor wanted to protest but knew he was right. She was no longer the tireless concert pianist of her youth, nor even the energetic teacher who could give lessons from morning until evening. She was 96 years old, her body wearing out even as her passion for music remained strong. Word of Eleanor's reduced schedule spread quickly. On the days she did perform, the lobby was packed with listeners, some arriving an hour early to secure the best seats. Local music lovers treated her performances as special events not to be missed. One snowy Tuesday in February, a sleek black town car pulled up in front of the hotel. The driver helped an elderly gentleman with a cane make his way carefully through the lobby to a seat near the piano. Just as Eleanor was about to begin her performance, Eleanor's heart nearly stopped when she recognized him. Harold Winters had been the conductor of the Portland Symphony during her years as a soloist. Now in his late 80s, his hair had turned white, but his eyes were as sharp as ever as they met hers across the piano. I had to see for myself if the rumors were true, he said, his voice still carrying the authoritative tone that had kept orchestras in line for decades. Eleanor Jenkins playing again after all these years. Eleanor felt a flutter of her old stage fright. I'm not what I was, Harold. None of us are, he replied with a wry smile. But music doesn't demand perfection. It asks only for heart, and you always had plenty of that. She played for him that day, not her usual program of crowd-pleasing pieces, but the challenging works they had performed together 40 years earlier. Her fingers faltered occasionally, but Harold closed his eyes, hearing not the missed notes but the soul behind the music. Afterward, as Clara brought them tea, Harold made an unexpected proposal. The symphony is planning a special spring concert to benefit the city's homeless shelters. We want you to be our featured soloist. Eleanor nearly spilled her tea. Harold, I can barely make it through an hour of playing. A concerto with full orchestra? That's impossible. Not a full concerto, he said. Just one movement of the Mozart K466. You remember it? D minor, she finished for him. We played it for the governor's dinner in '75. Harold nodded. The second movement, Romance, it's perfect for you, lyrical, not too technically demanding. I don't know, Harold. Think about it, he said, patting her hand. One last performance, Eleanor, for a cause close to your heart. The idea took root in her mind. One final return to the concert stage, to the world she had left behind so long ago. She began practicing the Mozart during her off days, pushing through the pain in her hands. But as February turned to March, Eleanor's health took a worrying turn. A persistent cough settled in her chest, and despite medication, it grew worse. Some mornings she was too weak to get out of bed without help. It's just a cold, she insisted when Clara suggested calling a doctor. The hotel staff watched her with growing concern. Robert privately spoke with the hotel's management about what would happen if Eleanor could no longer perform. She had become such a fixture at the Grand Avenue that no one could imagine the lobby without her music. On a particularly difficult morning, Eleanor woke feeling as though she couldn't catch her breath. Clara found her sitting on the edge of her bed, her face alarmingly pale. That's it, Clara said firmly. I'm calling an ambulance. Hours later, Eleanor lay in a hospital bed diagnosed with pneumonia. The doctor looked grave as he reviewed her chart. At your age, this is serious, he told her. You need complete rest and intravenous antibiotics. Eleanor closed her eyes, thinking of the piano waiting in the hotel lobby, of Harold and the symphony concert, of all the people who had come to hear her play. How long? She asked weakly. 2 weeks at minimum, the doctor replied, possibly longer. In her hospital room, time crawled by. Eleanor felt herself growing weaker despite the medications. The television mounted on the wall offered little distraction. She had never cared much for TV. She longed for the feel of piano keys beneath her fingers, for the communion with music that had sustained her through her darkest times. Clara visited daily, bringing flowers and news from the hotel. Everyone asks about you, she reported. The lobby seems so empty without your music. On her 5th day in the hospital, Clara arrived with a small electronic keyboard. "It's not a Steinway," she apologized, "but I thought you might like to have something to touch. Even if you can't really play yet." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as her fingers brushed the plastic keys. It made tinny, artificial sounds, nothing like a real piano. But the familiar pattern of black and white keys brought her comfort. Another visitor arrived that afternoon, Rose Henderson, the grandmother of the bride from the wedding that had changed Eleanor's life. She brought a thick envelope. "Letters," she explained, placing them on Eleanor's bedside table. "From people who've heard you play at the hotel. When they learned you were ill, they wanted to send their well wishes." Eleanor read the letters each night before sleeping. There were dozens, from regular hotel guests, from music students at the university, from elderly people who remembered her concerts from decades past, and from ordinary people who had been touched by her story and her music. One letter in particular moved her to tears. It was from a young woman who wrote, "I was homeless for 3 years after losing my job. Your story showed me that it's never too late for a second chance, that talent and dignity can survive even the hardest times. I have an apartment now and am taking piano lessons again. Thank you for showing me the way back to myself." As Eleanor's 2nd week in the hospital began, her condition worsened. The pneumonia had weakened her already frail body. Breathing became laborious and she drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes unsure if she was dreaming or awake. In her lucid moments, she worried about the future. The hospital bills would be substantial, despite her Medicare coverage. Would the hotel keep her room for her? Could she ever regain enough strength to play again? And what of Harold's concert, now surely impossible? Visitors came and went. Hotel staff, Dr. Reynolds checking her hands, even Patricia from the newspaper who promised not to write about Eleanor's illness without permission. But as days passed, Eleanor felt herself slipping further away from the world she had so recently rejoined. One night, as rain lashed against the hospital windows, Eleanor dreamed she was playing a grand piano on an empty stage. In the dream, her hands were young and strong again, flying across the keys without pain or stiffness. Thomas sat in the front row, smiling up at her the way he had at her first professional concert. She woke to find tears on her cheeks and a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened now, whether she returned to the piano or not, whether she recovered or not, she had found her way back to music before the end. After years of loss and struggle, she had played again, had touched hearts again. It was enough. But somewhere deep in her fighter's soul, a small voice whispered that it wasn't time to leave just yet. There was still music waiting to be played, still one more performance left in her hands. Spring arrived in Portland with gentle rain and bursts of color as crocuses and daffodils pushed through the soil. Inside the hospital, Eleanor remained unaware of the changing season. The pneumonia had weakened her significantly, and at 96 her body struggled to fight back. Doctors spoke in hushed tones outside her room, using words like declining and comfort measures. Clara visited daily, often bringing fresh flowers to brighten the sterile room. She would sit beside Eleanor's bed, sometimes reading aloud from music magazines or simply holding the elderly woman's hand while she slept. During Eleanor's more lucid moments, Clara would update her on happenings at the hotel. "Robert has kept your room exactly as you left it," she assured Eleanor, "and guests still ask about you every day." 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4. The benefit concert with the symphony was postponed, then postponed again. Harold visited when he could, his own health making travel difficult. "The music can wait," he told Eleanor firmly. "You focus on getting better." But privately, doctors informed the hotel staff that Eleanor's chances of returning to her former life were slim. At her age, recovery from such a severe illness would be remarkable. Then, on a particularly bright April morning, something changed. Clara arrived to find Eleanor sitting up in bed, alert and requesting a hairbrush. "I look a fright," she said, touching her tangled silver hair. "No wonder the nurses have been giving me pitying looks." The doctor was cautiously optimistic during his rounds. "Your lungs sound clearer," he noted, listening through his stethoscope. "And your oxygen levels have improved. You're quite the fighter, Mrs. Jenkins." "I have unfinished business," Eleanor replied simply. Over the next few days, Eleanor's improvement continued to surprise her medical team. She began physical therapy, working to regain strength after weeks of being bedridden. Her hands, which had been idle for too long, felt stiff and foreign when she tried to flex them. "Will I play again?" she asked Dr. Reynolds during his visit. "The arthritis hasn't worsened," he said after examining her hands, "but you've lost muscle tone from the illness. It will take work to get back to where you were." Eleanor nodded, determination etched in the lines of her face. "Then I'd better get started." Clara smuggled in the small electronic keyboard again, placing it across Eleanor's lap while she sat in a chair by the window. Eleanor's fingers moved slowly across the plastic keys, finding simple melodies: Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Frère Jacques, the kind she once taught to young beginners. The hospital staff soon grew accustomed to the sound of music coming from room 307. Some would linger in the doorway, watching the elderly patient's intense concentration as she practiced. A young nurse named Olivia asked if Eleanor would teach her a simple tune during her breaks. "My grandmother wanted me to learn piano," Olivia explained, "but we could never afford lessons." Eleanor made space beside her on the chair. "It's never too late to start," she said, guiding Olivia's fingers to the correct keys. By early May, Eleanor's doctors agreed she was strong enough to be discharged. The pneumonia had cleared, though she would need continued care and monitoring. "You need to take it easy," the doctor cautioned. "No strenuous activity, and certainly no playing for hours at a time." "What about 20 minutes?" Eleanor asked. "The symphony benefit concert is in 2 weeks." The doctor frowned. "Mrs. Jenkins, I don't think—" "One piece," she insisted. "Just one short piece." "Then I'll rest for a month if you say so." After much discussion and against his better judgment, the doctor reluctantly agreed she could perform, but only with strict limitations and medical support backstage. Eleanor's return to the Grand Avenue Hotel was met with celebration. The staff had decorated her room with welcome home signs, and Robert had arranged for the lobby to be filled with her favorite flowers, white lilies and blue forget-me-nots. Several regular guests gathered to greet her, applauding as Anthony wheeled her through the front entrance. "You all act like I'm some sort of celebrity," Eleanor protested, embarrassed by the attention. "To us you are," Robert said simply. Those final 2 weeks before the concert became a delicate balance of rest and preparation. Eleanor practiced the Mozart for just 15 minutes each day, saving her strength. Clara helped her prepare in other ways, arranging for a hairdresser to come to her suite, helping her try on the formal black dress Rose had purchased for her, making sure she ate properly and took her medications. 3 days before the concert, Harold arranged for Eleanor to practice with the full orchestra. A special chair was brought in, one that could be adjusted to the exact height she needed for comfortable playing. The rehearsal was kept short, just enough to ensure everyone was coordinated. As Eleanor played the opening notes of the Romance, the orchestra responding with a gentle swell of strings, she felt a profound sense of coming home. This was what she had been born to do, to make music that spoke directly to the heart. Despite her age, despite her illness, despite years of homelessness and hardship, the essential connection between her soul and the piano remained unbroken. The night of the concert arrived clear and warm. The benefit had garnered significant attention, partly due to Eleanor's remarkable story. Patricia's newspaper had run a feature about her recovery and upcoming performance, and local television stations sent crews to cover the event. Backstage at the concert hall, Eleanor sat quietly, conserving her energy. She wore the elegant black dress, her silver hair arranged simply but beautifully. Around her neck hung the golden piano key, her talisman through all the dark times. Clara helped adjust the wrist braces Dr. Reynolds had provided to support Eleanor's hands. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," Eleanor admitted with a small laugh. "But it's a good kind of terror, the kind I haven't felt in decades." Harold appeared in his formal conductor's attire. "5 minutes, Eleanor. The house is packed. And," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "they've already raised twice the goal for the homeless shelters just from ticket sales." Eleanor nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. What a strange and winding road her life had taken, leading her from concert halls to a homeless shelter doorway and back again. When it was time, a young stagehand helped her to her feet. Clara squeezed her hand once before letting go. "Play for Thomas," she whispered. Eleanor walked slowly toward the stage, leaning on her walking stick. As she emerged into the lights, the audience rose to their feet, applauding before she had played a single note. She saw faces she recognized: Robert and Anthony from the hotel, Rose Henderson and her granddaughter Lily, Dr. Reynolds, and in the front row, a group of formerly homeless individuals from the shelter that would benefit from the evening's proceeds. The applause continued as she made her way to the piano. Harold helped her settle onto the bench, adjusting it slightly for her comfort. The orchestra members tapped their bows against their music stands, a musician's sign of respect. When the audience finally quieted, Eleanor took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. She looked to Harold, who nodded once, then raised his baton. The orchestra began with the gentle introduction to Mozart's Romanzi. When it came time for the piano to enter, Eleanor's hands moved with a grace that belied their arthritis. The melody sang out, wistful, tender, filled with both joy and sadness. As she played, Eleanor thought of Thomas and the life they had shared. She thought of the dark nights spent in doorways, of the rain seeping through her thin coat. She thought of the first time she had touched the Steinway in the hotel lobby, how the music had poured from her like a long-dammed river suddenly set free. Her technique wasn't perfect. Once or twice her fingers faltered on difficult passages, but what her playing lacked in precision, it more than made up for in emotion. There wasn't a dry eye in the concert hall when she reached the final gentle cadence. For a moment after the last note faded, the hall remained utterly silent. Then came the applause, thunderous, immediate, accompanied by shouts of brava. Eleanor remained seated, too overcome to stand. Harold helped her to her feet for a bow, supporting her as the audience continued their standing ovation. Flowers were brought to the stage, white lilies and blue forget-me-nots. Harold gestured to the audience, then to the orchestra, but made it clear that this night belonged to Eleanor. She bowed once more before being helped backstage, where Clara waited with happy tears. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," Clara said, embracing her gently. The concert's success led to something even more meaningful. The publicity surrounding Eleanor's story and performance sparked a community initiative. A local businessman who had been moved by Patricia's articles donated a building to be converted into transitional housing for elderly homeless individuals. They named it Eleanor's Keys, a place where people who had fallen on hard times could find not just shelter, but dignity and purpose. The building included a music room with a donated piano, where Eleanor began offering free lessons once she had recovered her strength. 1 year after her first performance at the Grand Avenue Hotel, Eleanor celebrated her 97th birthday. The hotel hosted a party in the lobby, with the Steinway decorated with flowers and ribbons. Friends gathered around as she cut a cake shaped like a piano, her hands steadier now after months of gentle therapy and regular playing. "Make a wish," Clara urged as Eleanor prepared to blow out the candles. Eleanor smiled. "I already got my wish," she said, looking around at the circle of faces, hotel staff who had become family, music students who had become friends, and people from Eleanor's Keys who were finding their way back from homelessness, just as she had. Later that evening, after the party had ended, Eleanor sat alone at the piano. The lobby was quiet, the last guests having retired for the night. She played softly, Debussy's Clair de Lune, the very first piece she had performed in this space. As the final notes faded, Eleanor touched the golden key around her neck. "We made it, Thomas," she whispered. "We found our way home." She closed the piano gently and made her way back to her suite, not as a homeless woman seeking shelter from the rain, but as Eleanor Jenkins, pianist, teacher, survivor, a woman who had shown that even at 97, it was never too late for a new beginning.